My mother never yelled at me. She never hit me. She never threw me out of the house. She did something far worse. She looked at me one night when I was 17 and calmly said, "You are a mistake." No anger, no emotion, just truth, delivered like a fact. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. You don't have to be abandoned to be unwanted. Sometimes, you're raised by people who already decided you should never have existed. Some pain doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up in how you hesitate before speaking, in how you apologize for existing, in how love feels unsafe, even when it's offered freely. This is not a story about revenge. This is a story about survival. About what happens when a child grows up believing they were an accident, a burden, a problem that should never have happened. This is how being called the family mistake shaped my entire life. I always knew something was different about me. Not in a dramatic way, nothing obvious, just small things. The way my name wasn't said as often as my siblings. The way my presence felt like an inconvenience instead of a joy. My brother was planned. My sister was celebrated. I was tolerated. Our house was filled with photographs, but none of them told my story. My brother's ultrasound picture hung proudly in the hallway. My sister's baby shower photos sat framed on the living room shelf. I used to stand in front of those pictures and wonder where I fit. The answer was always the same. I didn't. When relatives visited, my mother would smile brightly as she introduced my siblings. "This is my son, and this is my daughter." Then she would glance at me, hesitate for half a second, and say, "And this one too, no name, just this one." I learned early how to be quiet, how to walk softly across the floor, how to close doors gently, how to sense when my presence was unwanted. I became very good at disappearing while still being there. At school, teachers said I was mature for my age. Friends said I was independent. They didn't understand that independence wasn't confidence. It was self-defense. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, asking questions no child should have to ask. Why don't they look at me the same way? Why do hugs feel awkward? Why does love feel borrowed? I didn't know it then, but I was already grieving parents who were alive, but emotionally absent. I was 17 when the truth finally came out. It wasn't during an argument. There was no shouting. It was an ordinary evening. The kitchen light flickered softly above us. The refrigerator hummed in the background. I was holding a chipped white mug filled with cold tea. My mother stood near the counter, her back partially turned. She looked tired, not angry. That's what made it worse. She spoke as if she were commenting on the weather. "You were a mistake." The words landed quietly, but they detonated inside me. I didn't react. I didn't cry. I just stood there, frozen, waiting for her to correct herself. She didn't. She glanced at me briefly and added, "You know that, right?" That was the moment my childhood ended. Not because I left home, but because hope died. Every moment of doubt. Every feeling of not belonging. Every unanswered question. They all suddenly had a name. Mistake. I nodded. I said, "Okay." Then I walked to my room and closed the door gently, because even then, I didn't want to upset anyone. I sat on my bed for a long time. No tears, just emptiness. That night I packed a bag. Not dramatically. Just the essentials. Clothes, school papers. A small notebook I kept hidden under my mattress. I waited. Some foolish part of me hoped someone would knock on my door. No one did. I left the house just after sunrise. The sky was pale gray, the kind of quiet morning that feels respectful, as if the world knows something heavy has happened and decides not to speak. I didn't leave a note. I stood in the doorway for a moment, bag on my shoulder, listening. No footsteps, no voices. No one calling my name. That was confirmation enough. As I walked toward the bus stop, the strap of my bag dug into my shoulder, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me I was still real, still here. I thought leaving would hurt more. But the truth was, I had already been gone for years. I stayed with a friend for a few nights. Then another. Then a friend of a friend. Each place came with invisible rules. Don't stay too long, don't ask for too much, don't get comfortable. I learned how thin kindness can be when it has an expiration date. By 18, I was working nights and finishing school during the day. I slept when I could, ate when I could, smiled when it was expected. Hunger became a background noise. Loneliness became familiar. I learned how to disappear inside crowds, how to become agreeable, how to say, I'm fine and mean, please don't ask. People praised my independence. You're so strong, they'd say. You've got it all together. They didn't know strength was the only option left. At night, when everything was quiet, the words came back. You were a mistake. I tried to outrun them with work, with exhaustion, with productivity. But trauma doesn't get tired. In my early 20s, I finally rented a small room. It wasn't much, thin walls, a window that didn't close properly, but it was mine. I sat on the floor the first night and laughed. Not out of joy, out of disbelief. For the first time in my life, no one could tell me to leave. I kept building from there. More hours, better jobs, more distance from the past. But something strange happened. The more stable my life became, the more unstable I felt inside. I didn't know how to rest. Silence made me anxious. Stillness felt dangerous. Because growing up, stillness was when you realized no one was coming for you. I tried relationships. They never lasted. Love felt like a trap, something that could be withdrawn at any moment. I stayed guarded, careful, ready to leave before being left. People said I was distant. They were right. I didn't know how to be close without bracing for impact. Therapy came later than it should have. The therapist asked me, what do you believe about yourself? I didn't hesitate. That I'm disposable. She didn't flinch. She just nodded gently and said, someone taught you that. That was the moment I understood something crucial. I wasn't broken. I was wounded. And wounds don't heal just because time passes. When the past comes knocking. It was a Sunday afternoon. Quiet. Ordinary. I was making soup, something simple, when there was a knock at my door. 3 slow taps. Not confident, not urgent. My chest tightened instantly. No one ever came unannounced. I opened the door. And there they were, my parents. For a second, my mind refused to accept it. They looked smaller. My mother's hair was gray now, her face lined in ways I didn't recognize. My father leaned heavily on a cane, his posture bent, his hands trembling. Time had done what I never could. It had weakened them. My mother's eyes filled with tears as soon as she saw me. We didn't know where else to go, she said. The words hit me like a wave. My hands started shaking. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. That 17-year-old inside me, the one standing in the kitchen, holding a mug, woke up instantly. They were crying, the same people who never cried when I left. I stepped aside and let them in. They sat at my table. I noticed everything. The way my mother wouldn't meet my eyes. The way my father kept apologizing for nothing. They told me their story. Illness, debt, estrangement from my siblings. They had lost everything. Then my mother whispered, we were terrible parents. The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. I waited for anger, for rage, for the pain to flood back. Instead, I felt distance. Like I was watching a scene from a life that no longer belonged to me. I was young, she said. I was angry. I didn't know how to love you. She reached for my hand. I'm sorry. A word that came decades too late and expected to fix everything. I looked at her hand. And I saw every version of myself they had failed. The child who stayed quiet. The teenager who packed a bag at sunrise. The adult who learned to survive alone. I don't hate you, I said. Relief washed over her face. But I don't owe you forgiveness, I continued. Her expression collapsed. That moment hurt her more than anger ever could. I built this life without you, I said. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. My father started crying openly. We just need help, he said. There it was. Need, not love. Not understanding. Need. And for the first time in my life, I didn't abandon myself to save them. I helped them find resources, shelter, medical care, but I didn't let them stay. When they stood to leave, my mother turned back. You turned out good, she said softly. I nodded. Then I closed the door. Gently. What survival really means that night. I sat alone in my apartment. I expected guilt. I felt peace. Not loud peace. Quiet peace. The kind that settles into your bones and stays. I realized something important. Healing isn't about reconciliation. Healing is about choosing yourself even when the people who hurt you finally understand what they lost. I was never a mistake. I was a child who needed love and learned how to survive without it. And if this story feels familiar, if you grew up feeling unwanted, overlooked, emotionally abandoned, know this. Being unwanted did not make you worthless. It made you strong enough to keep going when everything told you to stop. And that strength that belongs to you. No one else gets to claim it.